Hi, this interview is being conducted for the Muncie LGBTQ plus History Project. My name is Dylan Anderson, and I use he, him pronouns. We are recording at 1 o'clock on February 27th, 2020 at the Oral History Lab here on the Ball State campus. Thank you very much for your time and for agreeing to contribute to the project. Can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, Dylan. I'm sorry I forgot your name.
Will, you don't have to worry.
Will? I will. Okay. Hello. My name is Sara Collas, and Dylan is a student of mine, and I was asked to be part of this project. I am a sociology educator. I think my title is assistant teaching professor. And I've been teaching here at Ball State University for the sociology department for 2.5 years, and that's when I moved here from Madison, Wisconsin. But I'm an educator, writer, activist, LGBT member. Now, if I had grown up at a different era, I probably would have said I was genderqueer, but I say gender-nonconforming, and scrounger, and sociologist.
Can I get your age and pronouns as well?
Yes, my age is 56 and my pronouns are she, her.
Perfect. As you know, we're interested in the history of the LGBTQ plus community in Muncie, and you said that you would have at one point identified as genderqueer, but now as non-conforming. What made you kind of reach that decision?
Well, the language wasn't present when I was coming out at 21, and which would have been 35 years ago. There wasn't that term genderqueer. I like that it shows nonconformity. And gender nonconforming seems to be more current, I guess. But great question, Dylan. I think because I identify as non-gender conforming and as a butch lesbian, I think that fits the description of genderqueer, someone that challenges a gender binary, and I'm more masculine than feminine.
Was coming out an important experience for you?
Well, I didn't really necessarily come out in that kind of ritualistic fashion that I'm coming out to my family and friends and others. In fact, I remember when I was 16, my mother said, "I know you're gay." And I said, "I know." And it was that no big deal. And in fact, this pin I'm wearing, I don't know if the camera can see it. It says, "Keep it gay." My mother got this for me when I was 16 when she was visiting New York City. So my mother was very supportive, but I was closeted as a track athlete in college. That was 34 years ago. I wish I hadn't been closeted, but maybe it's because I was younger. But in terms of the coming out, I've been out for now 34 years, but there wasn't that kind of angst for me associated with coming out. But I was closeted, so that says something when I was in college.
Do you remember who you came out to first?
Well, I can say not first, but recently I had to come out to a student here. I had an international student, and they saw one of the posters of the remake of the I can't remember, Boys in the Band remake, a poster. And there was several men pictured who were being affectionate with each other. And a student said kind of in my office when they had it, I think, retake a test, something like, "Oh, I don't like gays." And it really threw me off. And I said, "Oh, you don't like gays? Why?" And she said, "I don't know any." And I said, "Well, I'm one." And that was 2.5 years ago. It kind of confused her. And I said, "Yeah, I've been out for 30 years now." And we became, we became closer as a result. But that was 2.5 years ago. I came out to the student. But I don't do that whole process that some do. I'm a lesbian, I'm an educator. I don't know, the heterosexuals aren't necessarily coming out in class, so I've tried to normalize it throughout my life after that closet experience in college.
Was the rest of your family as supportive as your mother? You mentioned your mother gave you that pen and was very
No.
supportive of you. Oh.
Well, my father kind of was clueless, but to be honest, I really didn't share much of anything to him. Now, I hope he knows I'm a lesbian now, but I've never said to him I'm a lesbian. And now he's older, I think 86, and I had met him at a restaurant in Cleveland, and we were meeting, and he was real confused to see me. He thought I was the busboy. Okay.
Were your friends as supportive?
Most of them, but I remember there was one person in the track team. I was a track star in college who I went to hug her, and she said, "I don't hug homosexuals." And I thought, oh. And then, I know, not the only negative experience. I attended a journalism workshop for promising students of color back in the 80s, and I was writing LGBTQ content. I remember it was so bizarre because we were only students of color. Bizarre and homophobic. They had a meeting without me and wanted to discuss it. I was only just writing about LGBTQ content. And I remember there was a closeted Latina lesbian, and she didn't even come out, and she didn't side with them. And that was a real negative experience. I had the choice to go into journalism or sociology in a PhD program. And after that negative journalism experience, I thought, I'll do the PhD in sociology. And then was completely out. But yeah, I've had negative experiences. I was once just walking in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and someone yelled to me, "You fucking dyke." Oh, and I've also been yelled faggot in Lawrence, Kansas. Yeah. So, and I've had some other negative experiences, for instance, in a predominantly white lesbian space in a bar. But yeah, it hasn't all been sunshine.
Do you think that those negative experiences have strengthened your resolve to support people in the community, such as students?
Definitely. Should I take my hat off now? I'm going to take my hat off so you can see
you
me a little bit
comfortable.
more, but want to show I'm a fan of the hip-hop culture.
Yep.
Okay.
You bring up hip-hop culture. You teach here a class on hip-hop, don't you?
Yes, I actually designed the course, Sociology and Hip-Hop, but it's been in... I said earlier that I'm both an educator and activist. It's been important to me to combine Black content, LGBTQ content, feminist content in the classroom, and as a way to challenge the Eurocentric curriculum and the heteronormative content, I wanted to combine a class that really focused on Black culture.
Now, I must ask, I know that you're actually not from Muncie. Where
No.
are you from?
I'm from Lima, Peru, but we moved to the United States when I was 4, specifically Cleveland Heights, Ohio, which was a great place to live in. It was very racially, ethnically, economically diverse. I remember seeing a lesbian couple holding hands when I was 11 in Coventry, which is a very kind of eclectic neighborhood, about 10 minutes walking distance from my mother's home. And I've been here in Muncie now 2.5 years, but no, I didn't. I'm definitely not from Muncie. I came here to teach the sociology.
All right. So you teach sociology here. You've been here for 2.5 years teaching. As a sociology professor and a sociologist, how do you look at this community in Muncie through a sociological lens?
Great question. Well, I've been disappointed in terms of expecting to find greater openness in the LGBTQ community. I really didn't know anyone when I moved here, and I thought maybe I could find some friends outside of the university, because I really didn't know anyone when I moved here. But I went to the gay bar, and I think it's called Tap Room.
The Mark III Tap Room here
The
in
Mark
Muncie.
III Tap Room, thinking I'd find friends, but what I found was a group of cliques who were very closed, and it was mainly white, cisgender, gay men who would have formed these very tight-knit cliques that didn't include me, and it's been a very disappointing experience. I thought the LGBTQ community in Muncie, what I found, might be more open. And I should say I've yet to be invited to a party from an LGBTQ member here in Muncie, Indiana. Although a recent friend, Holmes, did say she'd invite me to a party, but that's awesome. But that's 2.5 years. And I really thought gays were fun and open. They always partied everywhere else I've lived in. Why haven't I been invited to a party?
Going off that, do you still consider yourself part of the community overall?
Yes, of course. Just because they won't invite me to their parties, I'm still a member.
You mentioned back home.
Okay, just not really kidding, but yeah.
You mentioned back home for parties. How would you compare the community here to back home? And when you say back home, do you mean Cleveland?
Oh, I've been part of LGBT communities in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, the Michigan Women's Music Festival, a place I attended for 20 years as a researcher and a participant. I've been a member in Lawrence, Kansas, multiple cities, places, Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
You mentioned the Michigan Women's Music Festival, and then you've mentioned to me in several of your classes that was one of your big academic breaks. Can you explain that festival to us?
Yes, the Michigan Women's Music Festival began in 1975. It was the height of the lesbian activism period, in which lesbians were creating their own institutions, such as women's music festivals. But part of the politics of lesbian separatism was they defined women in terms of biology, at least at the Michigan Women's Music Festival, and were very exclusionary of anyone that didn't necessarily define in biological terms. So the Michigan Women's Music Festival was a place of research and festival partying, and I both observed and participated. Actually, I'm presenting a paper called What Went Wrong at the Michigan Women's Music Festival. And I argue one of the problems is that their gender communiques were very alienating to a generation and group of people who aren't necessarily identifying as male or female. Their policy was that the festival was for women-born women who have lived and identified as female all their lives. And so that definition excluded trans men, trans women, and I just think the festival, it ended up having an ending suddenly in 2015 after 40 years. So I'm going to talk about some of the reasons I think it ended. That was Lisa Vogel's decision, the founder and owner of the land in which the festival took place. But the politics centered around lesbian separatism and radical feminism. And radical feminists believe that because we live in a patriarchy, relationships between men and women can never be equal, and that they're dominators, and that we live in a male-dominated society, which we do. But the festival had both its wonderful qualities in that it celebrated women. Women could do anything, such as building these elaborate stages and serving as a security, but they ended up with these very narrow notions about gender, didn't allow for gender fluidity, but they did celebrate female masculinity at times, but other times it was policed because they were so afraid that Camp Trans would ruin their party. And Camp Trans was the protest group who challenged the women-born women policy, arguing that gender is much more fluid and that trans folks should be allowed on the land. Actually, I'm writing a book about it now, a book prospectus. But it really resembled the lesbian cult in many ways, in that Lisa Vogel, the founder and owner, made all the decisions and brainwashed people to think that transsexuals were going to create all this violence and havoc. But they did economically disrupt the festival.
I must ask, You mentioned that you've done research for this. You're going to be writing a book and a research paper.
I hope so.
Has that research affected your view on the lesbian community?
Yes. I think there are some factions in the lesbian community that have rather narrow and obsolete ideas about gender, that it's fixed, unchanging. Gender fluidity, Lisa Vogel should have embraced at the Michigan Women's Music Festival. There are other factions, but I think I understand the politics of lesbian separatism, but it can be so narrow where it doesn't allow for flexible kind of identities and experiences.
You've described to me personally that the community here is clique-based and cliquish. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes. The door person at the tap room, I went there about 2 months ago and I didn't have my ID. I forgot my driver's license. And even though I had been coming sporadically to the bar, which I try to support, but increasingly it's been very unwelcoming. So I'm not going to go into a place that I don't feel welcome. So about 2 months ago, I went in and it was for a show and I thought I'm going to get out of my house. And I went in and I forgot my license, and the door person, who I've been there for about 2.5 years, didn't let me in, and there was no like welcome, like, hi, how you doing? But I see the same door person will be sitting in a group of, mainly it looks like white cisgender gay men, playing some cards in a corner where I don't even get a hello, how are you? Very cliquish, and at the bar. But I also critiqued the lesbian community I found at the Michigan Women's Music Festival as being very cliquish too. I think the social world is dominated by cliques, and often those cliques can be almost impenetrable. But I don't know. So I found them cliquish, and I got to tell you another thing. That tap room, you can't. There's all the curtains are closed. In fact, I didn't even know this was a gay bar when I passed it. Now there's some more stickers to indicate LGBT pride, but the first time I went into the gay bar tap room, all the curtains were closed. I walk in, I can't even see outside because all the curtains are closed. And I thought to myself, this isn't 1950 where you can get arrested for being a gay. What the heck's going on? It's 2018 was when I entered the bar for the first time, and I thought, you can't get arrested for being a gay anymore. What the heck?
You mentioned that the bar scene is a bit more cliquish.
Real cliquish.
What has it been like for you to be an out woman in Muncie overall?
Awesome. Except that LGBT people aren't inviting me to their parties, but that's okay. I'll move ahead and do my own thing and create my own groups. Hey. Okay, sorry.
What are the reactions from your students about?
They've been great. The students have been awesome. Although for the SOCH 100 class, I have to tell you, some students did write on their evaluations that I included too much LGBTQ content. Well, for the last 2.5 years since then, I asked my students, what kind of LGBTQ content are you getting in your other classes? And some of the students aren't getting any.
You mentioned SOCH 100. What are overall the courses that you teach here?
I teach social change. I designed and created the sociology of hip hop course. I designed and taught, I should say, the Intro to LGBTQ Studies from the gay ghetto to the trans movement. I have taught racial and cultural minorities, an online class, social inequality, deviance, sociology of gender, and I want to create a new class for the department called Art and Society.
What would that class cover?
Oh, we'd look at the relationship between art, society, and artists. We'd focus again on Black and queer content. So we'd focus on artists such as Jean-Michel Basquiat, a Black graffiti artist who became a famous painter, who had to deal with being in a predominantly white world. Kara Walker, a African-American female artist who rose to fame in her 20s. We'd focus on Chicano murals and Chicano activism.
You mentioned Chicano
Harlem
murals.
Renaissance, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
We're right now in the sociology of hip-hop class looking at the relationship between the Black arts movement and hip-hop. So I would still focus on multicultural LGBT feminist content.
You mentioned sociology of hip-hop and how you're very proud to represent that community as well. Do you try to...
Well, I don't necessarily represent that community. I may be a member in my own way, but I wouldn't represent necessarily anyone. Just because I'm a member of the community doesn't mean I'm going to represent the hip-hop community.
Very fair. It actually opens up. You've mentioned in the past that the LGBTQ plus community is not a hegemonic entity and is very different and very diverse amongst itself.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, we're outsiders because it's a heteronormative world, so we're all really outsiders. So that's one reason we resist the hegemony. We're people of color, trans, non-gender conforming, cisgender, white gay men, lesbian separatists, Black men of color, gay men of color, Black gay men of color. We're really diverse, tremendously diverse. Trans women of color.
Do you see yourself as more part of the queer community of Muncie or the community of Ball State?
Community of Ball State, definitely. I've had a really wonderful experience at Ball State University in terms of my new classes being accepted and just feeling a more community with my colleagues than the LGBTQ community. There's this one member of the LGBT community. In fact, I saw him on campus and he said to me, "Sara, I love you so much. Where have you been?" And I want to tell him I saw on the Facebook that you had 2 parties that I wasn't invited to, but I didn't say all that. I just thought, why don't you invite me to your parties? Okay, sorry about the party again, but
No, that's perfectly fine.
why aren't I invited to his parties?
They're part of your experience.
That's part of my experience.
So you mentioned being more attuned to the community in Ball State. What resources or spaces do you think exist for LGBTQ plus people at Ball State?
Well, they have that great group Spectrum, and Spectrum came to my class. They're fantastic students, not that I'm stereotyping the whole group, but they were so welcoming, I got to tell you, the Spectrum students. I've had some student leaders in my class from Spectrum.
Can you explain what Spectrum is?
Spectrum is the LGBTQ group on campus. And I know that's a great resource for students. In fact, it was interesting. They invited me to one of their panels, and I spoke, and we had tremendous diversity in our perspectives. One worker at Ball State University said something that she was closeted at work here. And it kind of shocked me. And I thought, I thought, why are we closeted in 2020? It really shocked me.
Do you think that there are equal resources outside of Ball State for those people? Do you think, does Muncie overall have adequate safe space?
No, but there is a great safe space, Queer Chocolatier, that Morgan and her partner, Sherry, created.
What do they do there?
They sell chocolate, and they have a really welcoming environment for LGBTQ people and our heterosexual allies. But yeah, I just, in terms of where I've been before, it just seemed like there'd be lesbian potlucks and Sunday tea dances and parties Just I haven't found that. I got to have my own party.
Are you aware of resources or spaces that used to exist but don't anymore?
Well, I know that tap room has been around for, I think, 40 years or 35 years. In fact, I did go to a great presentation on LGBTQ Muncie history. That was at the tap room, and props to them for that. I wish they could have more great events at the tap room, but again, those curtains were closed for that event as well. And that's a couple speakers from the LGBTQ History Project spoke, including, I think, Dr. Johnson. But they should have more events of that nature. But again, those curtains were closed, I have to tell you.
I believe Mark III Tap Room and also organizations on campus have been known, especially to put on elaborate drag shows. What do you feel about those events?
Awesome. Drag has been part of the LGBTQ community since we've begun, so I love him. But to be honest, I haven't attended any of those events. I sometimes travel to Cleveland, Ohio, where my family is, but I should support those drag events, and I will do that next year if I'm still here teaching.
What do you wish Muncie had that it doesn't?
I wish they had more lesbian bars. I wish they had gay bars that were more welcoming. I wish there was our own lesbian LGBTQIA house on campus. I wish there would be more parties that I'd be invited to. All kinds of things I want here for Muncie, Indiana. One of my great dreams is to open up my own LGBTQ bar and make it welcoming and have all kinds of nights.
What do you think that having more bars and the IA house and stuff like that, what do you think that would do for the community?
Well, I know there's that negative aspect to bars and that there's alcohol consumption, but I'm hoping there would be more of a community involved. And I know Taproom does events, but I just don't understand why those curtains stay closed. And I think a LGBTQ center would be actually the best thing for the LGBTQ community here at Ball State and elsewhere. We could bring in speakers, we could have parties, we could have a safe space for LGBTQ students. Actually, to be honest, I think all oppressed groups should have don't forget the cards here. I think all oppressed groups should have their own spaces for celebration of culture, identity, and to create community.
You mentioned a few times in this interview so far about the parties and aspects like that. What role do you believe that parties play in the community?
Getting to know each other outside of the context of work. Parties, you can meet new people, you can meet your next partner, you can bond with one another. Parties are very different than work settings.
Do you ever go to other cities or places to seek out communities or experiences such as parties?
Absolutely. I'm going to an event in Sagatuck, Michigan, hosted by Mimi Gonzalez. It's a lesbian event. That's in Sagatuck, Michigan. I feel like I've established a community there. That's in June. I would love to go to Dinah Shore weekend to see their 30th anniversary. Would there already be a community there? Well, there may be new people to meet, but I think parties and spaces are really important for bonding with each other.
You mentioned bonding with each other and stuff like that. Do you apply the same sociological lens that you apply to the overall community to events such as that?
I try to reach out to my fellow colleagues, definitely, and invite them out to dinner. But I got to tell you, most recently I invited someone to dinner and they said, the first question was, who's going to be there? And I thought to myself, well, President Mearns isn't going to be there, or Queen Elizabeth isn't going to be there, so you're stuck with me. Okay. Sorry.
no,
That's true, though. That's a true story,
good.
too. Okay. All of these stories are true.
Do you find that the stories that you get out of parties like this and stuff like that just kind of make you feel more proud of your identity?
Yes, definitely. That's why I think whenever you're in a space in which there's other people that share your experiences and identities and background, that's always very affirming.
Have you had former students come back and reach out to you?
Yes, which is always awesome when former students reach out and say something like, a student just had to retake a test and they said I was an awesome professor. That was awesome. That was great to hear. I did see 2 former students at a bar and said hi to them. But in terms of LGBT students, I do see some of my former students, and they might not have all had positive experiences, but I hope they have, but I'm not sure.
Do you think that building a support network of former students and colleagues would be helpful?
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Um,
But how would I do that? Maybe form my own group, throw a party at my house?
you could. How would you compare
Yeah, you're
the
right.
community here at Ball State to other college campuses?
The LGBT community?
Yes.
Very separated, and everyone's doing their own thing. The LGBT, it's mainly academics I know, seem to be all doing their own thing. Very busy, rushed.
You mentioned coming from here from Ohio.
Well, Madison,
Oh,
Wisconsin.
sorry, Madison,
That's
Wisconsin.
okay. I've lived in Ohio, and that's my hometown.
Do you feel that Indiana as a state overall has maybe affected how communities present themselves? You mentioned
Maybe.
the curtains and stuff like that.
Yeah, maybe, because we're right in the Midwest. Good point. Maybe it is Indiana. I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
So, is your relationship with Muncie overall enlightened overall by your relationship with the community here on campus?
Yes, it is strengthened. Definitely. I just wish, again, there'd be more closeness, it seems. I know some LGBTQ academics, and they're always rushing around.
It seems like overall today that the community is coming out more, being much more out and proud. And you've had that kind of outlook from what you said ever since you came out. Do you want Muncie to be more like that?
Yeah, I want everyone to be out. Every LGBTQI member. There's no power in the closet. Visibility is where it's at. Yes, I want us all to be out, and this idea of self-internalizing any shame, I don't get it, you know? We're now in 2020. It's time to be out. I don't get it. And fly high rather than fly low. I don't get that. Wouldn't you rather fly high than fly low, Dylan? I would.
I would.
I know, and I think when you're closeted, it's not going to let you fly.
Aside from being out, you're also Peruvian, Jewish, and non-gender conforming. Do you think that these have also affected how you're seen by others as well?
Definitely. I'm a person of color, non-gender conforming, Jewish, lesbian. You know, all these are identities outside the mainstream.
Has your faith overall affected you as a lesbian?
Yes. And that I'm very proud to be Jewish and I'm proud to be LGBTQ member. But I think part of my culture, Jewish culture, really, emphasizes self-confidence, valuing education, valuing the arts, being productive members.
Have you gone to seek out, you mentioned arts, have you gone to seek out arts that are also positive of the community?
Yes, I just saw my colleague John Anderson talk about, I don't know if I'd call it necessarily art talk, but a political talk about or talked about black activism here and student activism in not only Muncie but elsewhere. I took my students to a lecture on African American artists for my sociology hip hop class. So, yes, I think arts is important, but you know what? I can't remember the original question.
It was, do you think that those arts can relate to the community, and do you seek out art that represents the LGBTQ plus community?
Yes, definitely.
Could you see yourself possibly giving talks on the LGBTQ plus community?
Oh, I'd love to give talks. That sounds awesome. I'd love to be a speaker. I'd love to be a public intellectual and make that big money like Cornel West is. Seriously. Okay.
So, can you tell me a bit more about your educational background?
Yeah, I got my first degree, my Bachelor of Science in Physical Education at Bowling Green State University. I had my master's degree from Bowling Green State University as well, and then got my PhD in sociology at the University of Kansas. But I was a phys ed teacher for 2 years at the Jewish Community Center in Cleveland, and that was a great experience, but I was missing my sociology, and I had minored in sociology, and there was a funding opportunity for me, so I took it. And I did share with you that at 20, it was 25, I could go to this internship at a journalism newspaper, or I could do a PhD program in sociology, and I had a really negative homophobic experience with other potential journalists of color. So my choice was to go into sociology. So I also have some journalism experience.
Do you believe that sociology was your path of choice because of your identity in some ways?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, sociology, I think, has a real important theoretical framework that contributes to the understanding of those who have been marginalized or oppressed. And sociology has really helped me in terms of understanding my own experience and using it in my classes to help even empower them.
We mentioned earlier that you use a sociological lens to look at the community overall. Do you use any other sociological theories?
Yes, I use feminist theories, critical race theory, queer theory, postmodernism, but really my lens is from this perspective of a lesbian feminist of color, Jewish outsider.
Can you explain queer theory?
Yeah, queer theory argues that sexuality is central to all social settings. Queer theorists make the LGBTQ subject central in the analysis, challenging heteronormative research, texts, arguments. Queer theory challenges the idea that heterosexuality has existed throughout time, place. Although heterosexuality is the dominant coupling, the queer theory argues that family is an invention, or the notion of the heteronormative family is an invention. But queer theory challenges this gender binary, argues that gender and sexuality are fluid.
Do you think that the closeness of the community that you've experienced here could be affected by the heteronormative society?
Absolutely. And that for some, that heteronormativity keeps people closeted. Just like those curtains being closed, I just don't get it.
You mentioned, I know you said that you just don't get it and stuff like that,
Okay,
but there
no.
are many people who talk about staying in the closet is very different for many different people.
You're right.
Do you think that as people become more out and proud like you, do you think that there will still be a necessity for the closet for some?
No, I really don't get it. Why would you stay in the closet? Just doesn't seem like a very good way of life. I don't know.
Could it be the environment in which people grow up?
Sure, absolutely. You're right. A lot of families can be maybe not very welcoming like my mother was. You're right. Okay. I think it'd be important for their well-being.
You mentioned track being a big part of your school life especially, and that not always being the best environment for you. What was school overall like for you?
I loved it. Can we take one quick break? I gotta throw this out.
Yep.
Okay.
Take one pause
I'm
here.
gonna just go over here.
All right, so you mentioned your mother being more supportive and you loved your schooling. Can you tell me a bit more about your professional life outside of school? So once you moved on past school, you had your journalism internship.
Yeah.
And you experienced some discrimination there. Is that the only place that you've experienced job discrimination?
Great question. Well, I know it's been difficult for me to land a tenure track job, but is that discrimination? Is that based on my research as a lesbian researcher who does lesbian studies? Who knows? I have experienced discrimination in maybe opportunities, but maybe, who knows? I'm not sure. But definitely that journalism workshop experience was very memorable and negative, that it did turn me away from journalism.
You mentioned the importance of safe spaces in the community. You mentioned Queer Chocolatier in the Mark III Tap Room. Do you believe that you've created safe spaces with your classes that cover LGBTQA plus content?
I hope so. I think I have.
You mentioned, again, your mother was supportive, your father might not have been.
Well, he was just kind of outside the picture.
Do you think that their origin and upbringing might have affected that?
Of me being out, yeah. My mother's definitely very vocal and assertive and proud about her Jewish identity.
So you mentioned your father not being much of a factor. Are you still in good contact with your mother?
Yeah, and I do occasionally still talk to my father. They're still alive, 86 and 88, which is awesome.
Any siblings?
I have a sister, and we're very close. But I also have a brother who's estranged from the family.
Oh.
That's his choice. But so I haven't. He hasn't contacted the family in 25 years.
Wow.
30 years, yeah. So.
It's very good to know that you have that social net, though, of your sister and your mother especially.
Oh, definitely.
I guess that would be a start of our wrap-up here. Are there any other groups or parties that you think we should talk to in the future?
Groups or parties? I think maybe, yeah. Ben Baskin might be an interesting interviewee. He teaches, I think, queer theory and literature. There's also a history professor. Vandelinder is his last name. Josh Vandelinder. Morgan, I think, would be great. Maybe you already, Morgan Reddy. She's the owner of Queer Chocolatier. I think those bartenders at Tap Room would be very interesting. Maybe even the door person that I mentioned. I think they may have very different perspectives. I should also say that Tap Room's predominantly white space too, which I forgot to mention.
Do you know any, if Mark III is a very white space, do you know any people of color that we would...
Just from the bars, really, but great question. Again, part of it, I don't know many people because I'm isolated here.
Is there anything else you would like to add that you specifically want us in the archives to know and to tell future generations?
Yeah, I would love Ball State to have their own LGBTQ center house and just continue to be out and proud and be you, boo. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I meant to say be true to you, boo. Okay. Someone said I need to put that on one of those Hallmark cards. Don't steal me, my quote.
All right.
Okay. Thank you,
It's on
Dylan.
camera. Thank you very much.
Awesome.